Senator Bernie Sanders appeared on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert and drew scrutiny from liberals online after the senator laid out the conditions that can prime people for conspiratorial thinking like QAnon.
You got 500,000 people sleeping out on the streets. You got 90 million people who are uninsured or underinsured. You got millions of people working for starvation wages. People have seen their jobs go to China and Mexico. And these people are looking out and say, does anyone give a damn about me? Why should I have faith in a government that has deserted me and my family? And then with that mentality, people become open for conspiracy theories, for big lies, etc.
Democratic strategist Colin Rohero and culture editor at The Federalist, Emily Jasinski, they join us now to discuss. Emily, I think it's very telling that anyone would criticize someone for saying that because it's just so patently obvious. We're talking about institutional failures, both seen from the left and from the right. Both sides seem to understand this for their own voters, but don't for the other, when it's obviously a bipartisan and uniquely American phenomenon.
Absolutely. It is idiotic to freak out over what Bernie Sanders said. In fact, as you said, Sagar, it is telling. The left in general should be saying exactly what he's saying. They don't even understand it, let alone have the willingness to think about it in public because they're terrified and they genuinely are that disconnected with the American people. Our political class has every reason to trust the political class because they're running it. The rest of the country, and I mean the rest of the country, I'm not just talking about the working class, I'm talking about the rest of the country. And if you look at who follows QAnon, it is not just the working class. That nobody has any reason to trust the political class. They have no reason to trust the media. They have no reason to trust the government when, especially over the course of the last year. So if you can't even say that aloud, and in fact, you're criticizing somebody who is accurately diagnosing the problem, you are so far untethered from the reality of the situation that you are in a position to correct. It's outrageous. And the fact that their sort of blue checks are upset about this speaks to a huge problem on the left. I mean, just it's hard to even understate it.
Yeah.
Colin, I don't know why it's so hard to hold two things in your mind at once. That number one, people are responsible for their own actions. You know, there are plenty of working class people out there who are totally screwed over by the government and lied to that didn't storm the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. But also that if we want to understand the root causes of why these phenomena are emerging, we have to look at the social, societal factors as well. Like, why is that so hard to understand?
I think anybody who criticizes Bernie Sanders for his comments here completely missed 2016, completely missed 2020, and has not been paying attention to the political attitude in the country for the last 10 to 15 years even. Bernie is telling the truth. Bernie had appeal for exactly what he's talking about. He almost won 2 Democratic primaries, and Donald Trump won specifically for this reason. So why people are untethered from that particular reality, I think, is just because majority of them, not all of them, elected officials on both sides, don't experience that life every day. The life that everybody has been living where they're losing economic power, they're losing kind of their feeling of security economically speaking, and they want someone to blame and or to help them. And so right now you have Donald Trump come in and say, I hear you. I understand what you're going through, even though he did not. And he appealed to them. And he almost won in 2020. I mean, Democrats didn't win by a large margin here, percentage-wise, in the presidential race. And I think that is the real danger that's going on here that is driving this kind of non-factual reality that we're living in, politically speaking, right? And I have to say, I don't think it's a uniquely American phenomenon. If you look anywhere around the world where there's a challenging economic situation, people give in to these religious theories as the way to move out of them, or other conspiratorial things that are not based in quote unquote fact, to have them find their way out of it. And I think we're approaching that, and that's the number one challenge for politicians in the United States right now. I don't care what party they're in. Can we help those who are struggling in America, who are continuing to lose economic ground?
Yeah, I actually meant it. It's a uniquely American phenomenon in that to deny it, it's just so patently obvious. Right? It's like you look across the rest of the world and you're like, they know what's going on there. It's like we're ones who are like, no, that's got nothing to do.
That's
with
not
what,
us.
Yeah, it's got nothing to do with what's happening and manifesting itself in our politics. It's fascinating because the backlash towards that, and I can see this on the right too, is that it's granting legitimacy, Emily, to the concerns of, yes, it's like not everybody, like you said, how many people who were in the crowd that day even stormed the Capitol? It's not all of them, right? Like all of them still believe the election was stolen. It's like, okay, well, how does that happen? How do you even get primed in order to believe something like that? And yet there's no real grappling with that question by most people in the political class, is there, Emily?
No, there is not at all. And that's a great comparison because QAnon has some intersection with the election conspiracy theories and like the Lynn Wood nonsense, but it is also kind of its own thing. There are a lot of people in the country, when you have the president of the United States coming out and saying he won in a landslide and it was stolen, that's another institution that because they didn't trust any of the other institutions, the media, the government, and they couldn't, big business, they couldn't trust those institutions because they'd failed them. They'd sent their kids to die in wars. They'd raided their retirement savings, et cetera, over this long buildup. No reason to trust absolutely anybody. And Donald Trump comes along and says you have no reason to trust anybody. And then he tells you he won in a landslide. I mean, it's another person that you can't trust, but you can see from a sort of like rational perspective why people put their trust in him and how I think he abused that trust. But this is like such a perfect example of why our elites, it's probably not just leftist elites that are criticizing Bernie for this. It's probably just like the neoliberal contingency in general, the Morning Joe crowd. It's 100% right. They don't understand it. They have no appetite to understand it. Instead, they just go after Bernie to virtue signal in their stupid Twitter echo chambers. It doesn't move the ball forward for anybody, and it doesn't help anybody but themselves. They'll get some retweets out of it, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole cottage industry of like finding absurd things to hate Bernie Sanders over. But Colin, I think that, as someone who cares a lot about politics and the Democratic Party, I think there's like something here about why Democrats, when they start to lose their grip on a state, they just like abandon that state. Because rather than looking at, and James Carville actually made this point in Florida, rather than looking at Florida and being like, wait a second, $15 minimum wage just dominated, as did, they just voted in favor of restoring voting rights for felons who've, served their time. So this should be a state that Democrats can win, but they get into their head, not like, oh, maybe have the wrong messaging, or maybe we need to, have a different platform or appeal in a different way. It's, oh, these people in that state are bad, ergo, we can't possibly win there. So let's just move on from Ohio. Let's just move on from Iowa. Let's just move on from Florida. These states are unwinnable because the people are bad and wrong. There's nothing we can do to change that.
Yeah, I think you're making a good point, and that point is really a difference in how politics in campaigns are played out between Republicans and Democrats. I have always felt this way. My Republican colleagues who work in campaigns will attest to this at some level. Republicans always have a long-term plan as to where they're moving. So they've got a 10-year plan for Florida, a 10-year plan for Ohio, and they continue to enact that plan over time, and it's been successful. Democrats don't necessarily abandon the state, so to speak, or abandon the people there or say the people are bad. They're looking at what's the easiest pickup this next 2-year cycle. What's the easiest places for us to win in 2022, instead of saying, look, yes, we need to win in 2022, but we've also got to win in 4 and 6 and 8 and 2030. So how are we going to do that? And let's continue to build towards that. That's the real thing that you're seeing play out here. And I think it's because Democrats often operate from a perspective of scarcity and campaign funding. And that's not really the world we live in. Democrats raise money, and they raise lots of money. And we can continue to raise money, continue to fund campaigns from regular people and from other organizations that help, support Democratic candidates. But we've got to have a long-term plan and understand that dynamic that you're talking about that's going on underneath the surface of polling, underneath the surface of everything, and build a long-term strategy that lets people know, yes, we understand you're frustrated by a lack of opportunities, and define those opportunities, how they are, economic, educational, et cetera, and then work towards satisfying those needs. That's what has to be done here, and have a messaging plan that works in coordination with that. Right now, we kind of lack both.
That's well said, guys. Okay, really appreciate it. Coming up, Disney is going to reveals why Mulan was filmed in a region of China, which is ethnically cleansing Uyghur Muslims. And according to journalist Zed Jalani, it's basically a shrug. Zed is going to discuss Disney's response when Rising continues.